the far extreme side of either stance of anything eventually is going to be hard to sustain unless you have a very calculated misinformation campaign that's backed by millions and billions of dollars in special interests, which is absolutely a thing. But I think you're kind of seeing this in California, not on the hunting side, but just in the absolute extreme policies they've adopted. You have normal people, moderates, even left-leaning left that are just like finally like, all right, what the hell has this state become? You know what I mean? Where basically it's lawless. People can just shit all over the streets. In San Francisco, you got people with heroin needles in their arms and they can't get arrested. And it's like this, it was almost this like romantic adoption of this, like, oh, this is the new way and this is so progressive. And then you have everyday people that now have to have, their daughter walk through the streets and see this, where a guy's shitting himself with a syringe out of his arm. And they're finally like, all right, how does this align with anything we believe in? And I think they're going to get a jolt of reality because I just don't think that's sustainable unless you can absolutely brainwash the public. And obviously they control the media, they control social media other than X. They definitely have the high ground and leverage in many ways. But also when the everyday person is affected, I don't care what CNN is saying, I don't care what Meta is sanctioning on their news feed that they can't see and shadow banning people. Eventually, people are going to come to their senses and say, all right, what the hell are we doing here? And I think that this is a similar kind of analogy here in, obviously specific to what you're doing. And I personally think in November, there's going to be a rude fucking awakening for a lot of people. And this is just Bear's opinion. I think a lot of Democrats are going to debrief it and say, all right, what the fuck did we just do for the last 4 years? Because in November, it will be very apparent what the everyday American wants. And this transcends many things, not just what you're talking about. Typically, I think extremism on either side is never the answer. I think usually the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? But unfortunately, these people, they position themselves on that, especially right now, the far left, and you're seeing things every freaking day where you're scratching your head. California just banned if a kid decides to change their gender, the parents aren't allowed to hear about it, right? They're not, the teacher has, it's like, all right, you're telling me a 7th grader has got to get a permission slip to go to the fucking apple orchard, but all of a sudden they want to do a sex change and the parents aren't allowed to know? Like, you think that's going to be a popular law in California? Like, who the hell is coming up with this shit? It's so ridiculous you don't know what's satire and what's real, right? And you don't even have to be like a diehard into politics to have a stance on them. You got everyday dudes like Joe Rogan coming out being like, what, he's a Democrat. Elon Musk, he was a lifelong Democrat. He just endorsed Trump. So I think I'm a little bit more optimistic, Dan, that I think just everyday people will eventually come forward and stop being so afraid to voice their opinion on these things, and eventually they're not going to. You want to shadow ban me? Go ahead. I mean, we've kind of in the same way. Now these are opinions of Bear and Tony, whatever yours is, but we've gotten unafraid to say that because eventually people just need to stop being so shy and passive about this and realize that there's real implications on these things, and we can't let the Soroses of the world and all these dickheads that have billions of dollars that are pushing these crazy initiatives to take hold. And it sounds like that's happening with you obviously in the wildlife space, but that's transcending every part of our society right now, and it's fucking crazy.
I'll tell you something, Bear, that's comical, because I had a guy, he outreached to me last December. We were 4 months into the legal side of this campaign, and he's a prominent, well-known fly fisherman, has a shop in Denver, and he hit me up and he said, I just don't see where you're coming from on this stuff, Gates, when it comes to the mountain lions, the bobcats, and I'm one guy that would probably have to vote for this. And I said, you got to be shitting me. I said, we sit on the same coalition together, and we're a sportsmen's coalition. We got 30 different organizations sitting on this thing. I'm the vice chair of that thing, and it just made me think real hard about who we were dealing with and at what education level we needed to turn around and try to get those guys involved. Well, as soon as the fur ban deal came out and we got legal guidance on the definition of what that would include, which was the fishing lures and everything, I went to him. It's fly fishing lures. It's regular fishing lures. And I said, did you see this? And he said, no, what is that? And I told him, and he goes, well, who the hell is coming up with this crap? And I'm like, yeah, that's what I've been asking on the mountain lion and bobcat deal. And he goes, well, that won't pass, will it? And I said, it's a fur ban. The average person is going to look at this and say, I don't want some rich bitch wearing bobcat fur that was shipped to China to come back over here in some garment. They're not going to look at it from a fishing lure or a fly fishing deal or a cowboy hat deal. I said, you are on the chopping block, just like I am. And there's just this profound look on his face, like, well, but that's my livelihood. It's my shop. It's been there 30 years, and I don't know what would I do? And I would have to move out of the city. And I said, yeah, but if they've already said that they want to, if they get it done in the city, they want to go statewide. And he just looks and he goes, where are these lunatic bastards coming from? And I said, that's what I've been saying for the last 30 years. But now it's in your wheelhouse. But you're such an elite fisherman that you thought that it could never affect you because it was about fish. I think that you are right that maybe we're not going to see a mass exodus to the opposite side, from the opposite side to us, but it doesn't have to be. We don't have to convince 30% of the voters that voted against us on different things. We just got to convince 1 or 2%. 1 or 2% of those guys plus our guys is enough to turn around and carry the load. That's where I think that United States is when it comes to a lot of things that you and I would probably think similarly on, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's wildlife, whether it's natural resources, maybe it's taxes or firearms. I don't know. But I think that people are getting to the point where they say it affects you and I don't give a shit. Wait a minute. How can it affect me? Aren't you going to help me? And I think that that's where we got into, because they're looking for us to be able to turn around and help them, because we were the only ones that was looking for help on any other level.
It's so complicated. I know Tony and I have put our tinfoil hats on a few times in here, and it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around all the different powers that be and the financial interests people have, the ideological interests people have, and when you weave that into politics with backdoor deals and lobbying and backdoor promises or backroom promises, I've adopted, unfortunately, a much more pessimistic viewpoint on just our politicians and how our country is run. When you kind of get a peek behind the curtain of how ugly it is, President Biden released a letter saying he's not running next year. We haven't heard from the guy. No official appearance. The primary now, 14 million voters that voted in a primary, their votes are completely irrelevant now. It looks like Kamala Harris will be the candidate. Has never even entered a primary. She dropped out last time before Iowa. So she might be the first president ever to never get a primary vote, a single vote. So, I mean, it's interesting, obviously I'm on the other side of the aisle. It's probably not hard to tell that. But when you zoom out and realize what just happened, you have a bunch of elites that in a closed door worked a deal to basically handpick a candidate, and that goes around the will of the people. Now, and if this was on the Republican side, I would say the same thing, because I think you got to be able to call it both ways. And I think both sides are really bad at calling it both ways. Like I think, Tony, when, the Republicans do something jacked up, like if this were to happen in the future, like we need to be objective enough to be like, yo, we need to call that shit out, because then we're just as guilty as the other side. But I think in this moment in time, we are seeing the most hypocritical thing happening where, democracy's on the line, and you're literally hijacking democracy by handpicking your candidate through backdoor deals with super powerful people. And imagine, of course, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Pelosi's, but what billionaires do you think were in that conversation as well? What kind of financial package do you think was given to the president to get him to all of a sudden 180 overnight on his stance, where just a week ago I'm not dropping out, okay? What did they have blackmail on him? Did his 50 years in politics finally, catch up to him, that all the skeletons that were in his closet that the Pelosi's and the Obamas and the Clintons know about were just dangled in front of him of like, all right, here's your severance package, take it, or here's plan B. All these things get revealed that most people probably already suspected were the case. So it's just, man, it's a bit scary. And I think, this issue, as well as, obviously November is going to be nuts. I think for most reasonable people, we gotta like let the extremes not influence just, how united we are, because they're doing a really good job of dividing us. The media does a really good job of that. And it's almost like they're just producing a dynamic where it's the extremes on both sides are getting kind of the loudest voice, and it's a little bit scary, but super fascinating to get into this. And obviously, Dan, we'll be, keeping our eyes on this as we get closer to November. And, I would have to think, these things wouldn't pass, but, and I think that the biggest thing, your point you're bringing up, Dan, that is the most fascinating is because, again, just like the wolf ban, on the surface, someone be like, all right, what the hell are they talking about? Mountain lions and bobcats? Like, who cares? They're going to ban that? Big deal. But you hit the nail on the head. It's the precedent, right? This is the one domino that leads to the rest of the dominoes, and you are immersed in that world enough to know that that's exactly what's happening. Where an everyday Joe like me, if I'm in Denver or Boulder and I see that, all right, big deal. Yeah, I'll vote against that. Those animals seem cute and cool, and I don't want them to be endangered, blah, blah, blah. So I don't really fault the actual voters, because I just think they're a bit misinformed, and I don't think that vote is malicious. I think it's the power structure behind it that is what really we need to target, because that's the real villain in this story, not the 21-year-old kid in Denver that I like to make fun of that was voting for his first election and wants to be this this activist progressive voter. I don't fault them for that. They're passionate, and they have a view on the political side of the aisle that is different from me. But hey, that's the American process. We need to embrace that.